Behave yourselves.
And Norm, take it away.
Greetings, everybody. We hope you enjoyed the film, My War Hero Uncle. Here to lead the discussion of that film is Jack Kugelmas, the Melton Legislative Professor in the Center for Jewish Studies. Jack has done an enormous amount of scholarship, not only on sources relating to the Holocaust, but also Jewish culture and Jewish popular culture and Jewish secular culture. He chose this film as well as many of the others. So I will turn it over to Jack Kugelmas to lead the discussion on this film.
Thank you. I chose this film, and at certain points when we were going through films, I think it got left out. And then I got very alarmed that it had been left out. And I thought, oh, this has to be in. But this is really a great film. It's a very quirky film, and in some ways very, very, very intriguing. I have to tell you, the second time watching it, I feel less committed. But nonetheless, okay, it's not quite as great as I thought it was, but it's still, there's a lot of stuff in here. And so maybe we can tease some of it out. I quickly jotted down a few thoughts. And I thought maybe I'll just review them very quickly. And I think what really got me intrigued by the film in the first place was that the film kind of hinges on what I call the enigmatic, that you don't quite know what the story is. And as it proceeds, you sort of vaguely start to figure out what's going on. You don't never know for sure, but there's a process of unraveling of some kind of mystery. And there's an unraveling of a mystery of what happened to the uncle, but there's also an unraveling of a mystery of the grandson, because the sexual identity of the grandson is not entirely clear unless you're very perceptive at the beginning. And then it becomes clearer and clearer in the course of the film. So that seems to be one of the leitmotifs of the film, of the enigmatic, and as it gets revealed. The second dimension to this film that struck me was the demythologization of the late 1960s. That the film kind of probes the classic mythological dimension of Israel, which is the 6-Day War, and also the kibbutz, and demythologizes. It takes a war hero. The subject is a war hero, but in the course of the film, we find out that the war hero was not really a war hero and didn't die on the battlefield, but died through suicide because he couldn't handle something. And so I think you can take this as symbolic of a larger process of demythologization that the film is suggesting of the 60s generation and the 6-Day War. My third point is that it also demythologizes the heroic masculinity, because it introduces this idea of gayness, possibility of gayness as part of the 60s generation, rather than just a contemporary invention. So it speaks to some issue of gender here. My fourth point is how it asserts the affective relationship of grandparents and grandchildren. And it's interesting that it's done partly through Yiddish. When the grandmother is being particularly affectionate towards the grandson, she switches to little bits of Yiddish phrases or Yiddish words. And that's something I found intriguing. Fifth point is the place of the kibbutz here. The images of the kibbutz are really fascinating and very beautiful. And it sort of, I think, recreates the kibbutz as a pastoral, an Israeli pastoral, even if only in a visual way. And my sixth point is memory work and that the film does, and the price of not acknowledging certain events, the covering things up, not engaging in things that make memory work necessary. And I think the film speaks to that very well. So those are the thoughts that I have. I like the sensibility of the film. And I still like the sensibilities of the film. And I'll throw it open for discussion. I could say we could all go home, but we already are home, so we can't do that. Any thoughts on the film? Any?
Gail
anyone?
has some, but she needs to unmute herself.
Okay, so I saw the film for the second time tonight, which was a different kind of viewing than the first time. I was one of the screeners, and I wasn't delighted with it the first time. I thought there were some charming things, and this time I was sort of watching for different things, for techniques, for cuts, and what I liked about it was its sort of its roughness on the one hand, because there are some cuts, it looks almost homemade. It's really the grandson. I was a little more impatient this time in terms of production with he must have just put set the camera there for B-roll, like for roll, and then whatever he got he was going to pick from. So those couch scenes, even though they're interesting and they punctuate the film, and some of them are quite sweet, I had less patience for them this time. I did think that the demythologization of the IDF and the 60s, well, 69, 67 was really beautifully done. I loved the parody of Rock Bay Israel, the song when the reserve, do you remember the commercial where the reserve troops are singing? And it was really, caricatured, but I thought it was beautifully done against the photos. And I also noticed the same thing, the footage from the 60s, the colors of it were beautiful. I really liked the use of the footage, except when it got too shaky because I got dizzy, but I appreciated that sort of back and forth. And I, on the other hand, immediately I could tell he was gay. And I actually saw a film that wanted to have suspense, but I could have told you within 3 minutes that he committed suicide, wasn't a hero, and was gay. So I didn't feel that I had, any real suspense the first or the second time. But he's charming, and she's charming. And I too noticed that, especially when she was spontaneous. There's one moment not when she's complaining, Kinder Mina, but at one moment when she jumps at him with affection. I don't know if you caught that, and also jumps into Hebrew, sort of reminded me of grandparents. But no, it was, it's a sweet documentary, I think, that takes on the facade, and the girlfriend issue, of course, did that as well.
Mm-hmm. Did anyone dislike the film?
It reminded me, for some reason, we had a film a few years ago called The Chaos Within, that was about this guy's relationship with his mother. Yes. And for some reason the production kind of reminded me of that, even though the subject of it was very different. I have this technical question it'll sound idiotic, but I'm always struck by how casual the IDF seems to be with weapons. The idea that you could kill yourself in your room with your loaded weapon, actually somebody else's loaded weapon, would be impossible in most militaries. And you're not issued your rounds unless you're on the range and stuff like that. I'm just always sort of struck with that. But anyway, it also seemed to me that from the document, I must have misread it, that he killed himself in February, but I must have misread that. That must have been wrong. But I mean, how did that work? I mean, did he did he kill himself right during the war? I mean, but if he killed himself much sooner, I mean, surely the parents would have known that he didn't die during the war itself. I mean, there was stuff about this cover up that didn't seem to make any sense. And I don't know if anyone else saw this on the document and I just misread it. But the only way that cover up was going to work is if he killed himself during those 6 days, and so
That's
No, but he was stationed on the kibbutz, so
yeah.
the title of the movie. They didn't really present him as a hero as having died in battle, because if you look, it said died during his military service. It doesn't even say in action.
I see.
Yeah.
right, and there was insinuation it could have been a raid, a
Okay.
cross-border raid. So
Okay.
Yeah, no, they never.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
They never said he died during the battles of the '67 war,
Okay.
but it was his childhood imaginary that had put that together to make him my
I see.
real uncle.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
you have to, when you go to films, you have to go with Gail because she can explain everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Charming.
The other thing about the weapons, Israel is a heavily armed place. So when you go through security at stores, the security guard will invariably ask you, do you have a weapon? Which I find very, very funny. It's like, what? So if I have a weapon and I intend to do harm, I'm not going to say, yes, I have a weapon. So, but yeah, so it wouldn't be a big deal to get hold of some kind of weapon. So. Any other thoughts? Did anyone dislike the film?
It's not a great film.
Well, how bad is it as a film?
It's a charming film, and I don't know, I didn't look it up. It might have been his first film. I don't know.
I see this,
And there are, like, if you look in the kitchen scene, you can see, like, we were laughing at the jump cuts that you cringe over, but the way he did it, it kind of worked. And then you'll notice that there was an enormous amount of voiceover because he had just done B-roll in the living room, and then he worked from that. And then the tons of just photos with voiceover because he hadn't actually filmed his story. So he had to just write his story and then attach things to it. So the montage work was important and it was well done. But I'm sure it was a miraculous film for the budget he probably worked with, is my guess.
Sure.
So is the assumption that the grandmother knew that he had killed himself? That's the impression I got.
Yeah, there are things you don't want to know, and I'm sure she probably knew he was gay too. And it's interesting because there's some ambiguity about that gun. They're crying. The guys aren't quite right, his war hero friends, about what went on. So that's the only ambiguity in the story that I found where I thought, they're leaving this a little bit open. Why did he take his gun? That wasn't clear from the story. And then, sometimes, things happen in the military to people who aren't straight as well. So, I wondered about that. There's a moment where, he probably should have left it a second more when the grandmother finds out that he's, gay, the younger, not the uncle, but the grandson. And she puts her head on his knee because she really is becoming emotional there. She's held her stuff together. I'm going to accept you no matter what. This is a different world, but there she's about to lose it. And I hate to say it, but I would have liked to see one more second held on that. It was a really touching moment, I think. And probably an intergenerational one. I'm sorry about that, brother. Speaking of family.
Somebody help us out. No, you're out there. I can hear you breathing.
That's the dog.
I'm so sorry. I don't even hear her anymore.
Just glad it's not my dog.
Time to get my parrot in here.
I'm sorry. I'll
It's
put on-
okay.
I'm very, during the day when you're teaching, I have her out, but I forgot about it.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Silence.
no other thoughts on the characters. The grandmother's charming. I like that she walks around in schmatas and gets her toes and her nails done. Um, it's a very cute thing. But what I like the most about the film, I mean, aside from the relationship of the two, is the not to go on too long and explain the film, John, but I love the ending. I love when they go through all this. She rehashes the story of her son that she doesn't want to rehash and the reality that she's been trying to hide. And then he comes out to her. She doesn't really want to see that either. And then she says, okay, let's get pizza and forget all this. I really loved the end. I thought he had a very powerful end to that.
I thought there was a lot of humanity actually in his comrades. All of these years later, and the one who said, I'd really put this out of my mind. I really hadn't thought about it, partly, I guess, because it was his gun, and had managed just not to think about it for, 50, 60 years. Those were very interesting interviews.
And there too, where he says he was surprised that the gun worked because it was never properly cleaned.
Yeah.
Which also then throws in a little bit of ambiguity to this whole thing. Did he intentionally kill himself, or did the gun accidentally work when it wasn't supposed to work? Was he just playing it, possibly killing himself, and then for once the stupid gun works? The other thing that they really liked was when they described their shock. They had this really attractive girlfriend.
Yeah.
And
So
that was, sorry.
No, that was exactly why I felt that ambiguity really made the film richer, because my read was that this could have been, he'd been bullied. They knew he wasn't straight, which is why they're surprised at the gorgeous girlfriend. He may have taken his gun, but it seemed to me the weight and yes, the humanity of those interviews, and the one guy who really gets upset and says, I don't want to cooperate anymore. I shouldn't have done this. And he said something I've seen in so many of my own interviews when they're really touchy, like for the Cajot film early on, Bacos, his co-pilot said, why are you digging in the garbage pails of history? And his friend says, why are you bringing this up again? Why are you bringing this up again? And I feared that it seemed to me that there was some sense of guilt. He says so, I feel responsible. But my guess is it wasn't for the gun. It was more for knowing that he was troubled. He was probably bullied, so we know that context and we sort of read onto it. It may just be me reading onto it, but my sense is they were all aware of it. He wasn't a good looking guy. He didn't fit in. He wasn't happy. The family knew it. And everybody sort of ignored that he was troubled. So everybody was responsible,
It's interesting that you think he was bullied. It kind of puts that missing link as to why he was so unhappy.
And why they feel so bad, right?
And why he felt so bad.
Yeah, because even if they were his comrades, they probably knew what he experienced on a daily basis. And we see this.
Well, I would think that anytime there's a suicide, people around feel bad because they feel they should have known, they should have intervened, stuff like that, irrespective of the reason, whether they had any part in the person's unhappiness. So
gay in 1967 at the moment of the New Hebrew, that's tough,
But we don't know that he had any qualities that would make him appear to be gay. We're only surmising. We really don't know.
We do surmise it, and if he's not gay, he's a misfit. They tell you he's a redheaded guy who's not good looking, who doesn't belong with her. I mean, he's not the charismatic.
But she has no sexual interest in him, as far as we can. It's not like she says, "Yes, I wanted to go further, but he didn't want." We're just friends.
She said he never touched my hand, and I wouldn't have wanted him to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But the parents treated her like a girlfriend.
And the father's reaction, as if the father always knew, probably didn't, who knows, but the father's reaction at the funeral, and the girlfriend who wasn't a girlfriend saying, that the son didn't measure up or something like that.
Yeah, it's a good front. All of that leads to the fact that they all knew, and he was a troubled figure.
Mm,
But it also, you can see why the grandson would have wanted to make that story,
mhm.
to rewrite that story and to be out.
Well, he also has he has a truly enigmatic story, and there's something here that is filmic in terms of a story that can be unraveled. That isn't, you don't reveal this, you don't reveal it from the beginning.
Yeah.
I think when he does suggest very early on that he may not bring home a girl, but it's a mistake because he shouldn't have done it. He should have, me, I would never know until the end that he's gay, unlike you, but I never know these things. But there, if you do listen to the dialogue, you'll know that he's gay. And I don't think he should have revealed it at that point.
Yeah, I liked most of the unraveling of the story, the pacing of it. Even if I knew he's going to be gay, the war hero is not going to be a war hero. I sort of liked the pacing, except for the little bit long on the sofas.
Mm. Well, it's a low budget film, for all,
I know.
Although I was surprised they went to Los Angeles, then filmed in Los Angeles. It was interesting, actually, to film the friend, in Los Angeles. I thought that was. I thought the father's reaction to the friend's departure from America was really interesting. They wanted nothing more to do with her. Doesn't talk to people who leave, who leave.
I thought that was an interesting line.
There's this thing that bothers me throughout, though, that having told this lie that he died during some operation, the lie ends the minute it's time to pay the grandmother. It's at that point that, well, you're not eligible. It seems to me that if you're going to lie in 1967, you might as well keep the lie going until 2016 or whatever it was. And it made me think of I forget what Yitzhak Grunbaum's son's nom de guerre was, but he was the guy who was supposedly a capo in Auschwitz, and he fought in the War of Independence and was killed in battle. And the assumption was always that his comrades killed him for supposedly being a Nazi collaborator. And there was quite a thing, over how his death should be memorialized, as to whether his name should go on the pillar of fire and all of that. But I forget how all of that was resolved. And of course, his father was a minister and everything. So, but that was sort of politely resolved too. And I don't think it was until Tuvia Frilling started writing his book on this guy that this ambiguity came out about his death in the 1948 war. But the army sort of just maintained the fiction that he was killed in battle. And of course, I have no idea whether the family got compensation or anything like that. But it just struck me as strange that in the first place, if the mother really thought nothing was wrong, she would have applied for her pension long ago. She wouldn't have waited, and it wouldn't have just not applied at all. It was the son who applied, so she must have known that son. But it also just struck me as strange Well, we don't have to keep up this charade anymore. You're just not eligible for anything. That whole thing struck me as disjointed.
I thought they knew. My,
I took it, this is Pollyanna and me, sorry, Gil, but I took it as like her financial situation had deteriorated somewhat, and that she needed the the pension that she didn't and perhaps didn't need earlier. I think I'm not correct, but that's how I took it when I was watching the film.
I could
Or pizza.
yeah, I could see that, and he was asking, why didn't you get it? Why don't you have a pension? And she's saying, like, I don't know. Meanwhile, she said, I let him take care of everything. He made the decisions. He said so. I did it. So she knows they didn't get a pension. She knows there's probably a reason they didn't get a pension all that time because they would have gotten it, right? So
We also don't know when her husband died, do we?
yeah, that's problematic. But I thought she was kind of aware that they didn't have a pension. There was a reason they didn't have a pension, and just let him go through the motion. And she even says at one point, I thought it was important not to tell any of the children or the grandchildren. I wanted them to have a happy life, but once they're adults,
All right, we'll tell them then.
yeah.
I want to say something else about the film, and that is people have not been involved in documentary filmmaking, don't realize how much of documentary filmmaking is acting, reenacting. And so the scene where he's calling the Social Security, whatever he's calling, is clearly a reenactment that they already knew what the answer was. And going to look through the file, he found out they already looked through the file. So, it's like we watch this as if this is real. This is really happening now. But in fact, it's all play acting.
What's worse is when you're doing a documentary is when you film it, or it's in the pre-filming when you're doing the research and you get that story and that's what you needed on film, but it's not on film. So you have to go back and have them do it again, and it's never the same, and you have to do it over and over.
Right, exactly. Well, usually the audience doesn't quite know, and that's what helps.
Yeah.
But you know how shoddy it really sounds. So.
It was
We
a
can't have a good historical documentary without a scene in the archives, so I'm glad they had a scene in the archives.
That's true.
I in terms of those kinds of grandchild stories going back, because it's of the same genre, I thought, I'm not sure I have the name right. The Flat, is it The Flat?
Yes, Hadira, The Flat. It's translated as The Flat. Not The Apartment, because there are too many other films called
I didn't
The
know what the English was. That is, I remember it as really finely done.
It's a very fine film, yeah.
Similarly,
But that was a German-Israel co-production. So you have two countries with excellent documentary film traditions, and this is the first film.
There's also budget. Yeah, there's no question on budget here. This was not a budget.
It was a little long, as I recall, though.
I loved it.
It could have been cut a little bit.
It did have a lot more travel. Yeah.
But it was a good film. Yeah, a very good film. Yeah. And yes, it had the element of the enigmatic.
Yeah, going back to the grandparents' paper story. Yeah.
It hinged on that a great deal. But there was much more material there, infinitely more material. And even when things got unraveled, there was even more to unravel.
Have you seen that one, Norm? Because you'd really like that one, I think.
Yes, you have to have seen it.
The Flat?
Yeah.
I don't think we had it at the festival, but I've seen it.
We did have it at the festival.
Okay.
Years ago.
And we also own it. We have it in our collection.
Right.
It's probably available on Netflix at this point too.
I think it is.
It's a very good film.
Yeah.
Well, all right. I have nothing more to say. I don't think anyone else does either. So we've squeezed out of this as much as we're going to squeeze out of it. So
remind me, tomorrow is
Those Who Remain.
Those Who Remain.
8 o'clock. No, 7 o'clock, and the discussion. Maureen Tareem, who's a film scholar, is leading the discussion at 8:30.
Correct.
Yeah, super. Okay, everybody. Night.
All right.
All right,
Thanks,
thank
everybody.
you.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Virginia.
Thank you, Virginia. I meant for the talk. Thank you both.
Thanks for showing up.
Good night.